Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the AAACE Town Hall meeting, which is sponsored by our 7 commissions. And I thank you all for being here today. I am going to introduce Matt Ramirez from CWPD, and Matt will start the town hall off as well as giving us some instructions. Matt?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Terry. Good morning or afternoon or evening, everyone. I appreciate everyone joining. I just looked a second ago and maybe it's gone up. I saw 40, but now we're at 48 folks on the line, which is phenomenal. I appreciate everyone joining. We have got actually just 3 questions today we're going to run through. So you might think as adult educators and as a commission, we would have prepared a dozen questions with sub-questions and sub-questions for that, but we wanted to keep it simple, and we also want to hear from you. So if you look on the bottom of your screen for Zoom, you will see the participants that are there, you'll see chat, you'll see the sharing screen. If you would open your chat window, you can go ahead and open that and keep that open. You can always type into the chat feature. We do ask that everyone stay on mute. I had jokingly said that we will hear 25 Pomeranians and 45 toilets flushing if we're not all on mute. So please stay on mute. We'll have time for questions and answers at a point in time later on. But at least for now, please stay on mute. And with that, I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. We will go to our first question, which is going to be posed by Christy Rhodes. As Christy answers the questions, again, feel free to type into the chat, and if you have anything you'd like to add, feel free to raise your hand as well.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for spending a little time together today. I know we're all really enjoying being on our computers, connecting with people, but we would much rather be in person, but hopefully we'll get the opportunity to do that. And today really, as Matt said, this is just an opportunity for us to kind of check in with everybody. What are we doing? How are we doing? And hopefully share some things going on in the various fields that we all represent. So without further ado, I just want to speak for the adult basic education and literacy folks, and I see some of the people online as well, that we've heard incredible, oh, sorry, my question, let's get to the question first, right? Basically the starting point of what has changed, right? What adaptations have programs made, have people made, have institutions made? So I'm just going to tell you real quick what I've heard, and then if you would either share in the chat window or raise your hand so that we can let you hear your voice, so that we can hear your voice as you share some of that experience too. So as I said, adult basic ed and literacy, there are a lot of good research studies going on already about what some of the changes. So we can't really talk about all of those adaptations, but in general, we have seen an incredible switch, an incredibly fast change over to various types of distance learning, right? So either computer, internet-based learning, or even back to the old school of packets and supplying learners with physical questions and so I think the big thing I would say is that we're really trying to keep the learning going. However, adult basic ed and literacy, which includes, right, our pre-GED, our GED, our ESL, amongst some other programs, it's tough because they might have lower levels of literacy in general, right? There might be challenges with access to technology, access to the internet, access to actually having the hardware needed to deal with some of the incredible programs that we can offer to them to continue learning. So I would say, in a big nutshell, we're trying to continue to offer educational opportunities. There are some incredible challenges, and I think that's the next question, so I don't want to delve too much into it, but incredible work going on, hopefully work that will not have to continue that much longer, because it's really straining resources. One other thing that comes to mind for a lot of the adult basic ed programs as well, they're acknowledging the fact that learning can't happen if our basic needs aren't being met. So I've heard of programs throughout the states doing food banks, now getting involved in really taking care of the welfare of their learners, and just really getting in touch with people in various ways that they had not had to before. So a lot of good stuff going on, but a lot of challenges. So having done an incredibly fast, very, very quick synopsis of what I've heard that's going on in adult basic ed and literacy, what about you guys? What are some of the changes that you're hearing about, the adaptations?
So far, Christy, there's nothing in the text. I don't know that
They're going to make me do the teacher thing of calling on them, aren't they? I'm good with that.
I was going to see if I saw any hands raised. I don't see any hands raised right now, but maybe as I'm sure someone is furiously typing into the either the chat or trying to figure out how to raise their hands. Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
And it's interesting. You mentioned packets, and it took me back a long time. So other than packets, any other creative ways people are getting information out there? So maybe piggybacking on that, we have from, I'm not going to say this name correctly in any way, shape, or form. We have something from Simone that says, "Yep, we are already totally online. We had to adapt to the new timelines and changes." By the way, people are asking themselves, why is he reading that out? But I know some folks have joined via phone, so I'll read these out to you. The biggest problem was for people who had kids and had to balance people, classes, work, and family. Yeah. And I think you mentioned that as well, Christy. From Laura, in the national system, adult schools that were very resistant. We are living a push towards technology. And in a very few weeks, we had a leap forward. I'm going to say a huge leap forward. And then from Susan, we had to create more virtual meetings with my learners. They're normally online, but they found they needed more face-to-face time, even virtually during stressful times.
That's interesting.
Even Saturday evening informal gatherings. I'll share, I've been doing with my team more, and my team all work together with me here in Tampa. I've been doing virtual happy hours with them just to keep them, or to keep me sane.
Did you say virtual happy hours? I love
virtual happy hour. Yes. Yeah. In fact, I've got
Innovative.
one after this one, but it might just be a virtual Matt happy hour.
Did you see what Annalisa said? The expression, she said, they've implemented learning partners in place. So students serving as educational mentors of relatives co-isolating together. What a great community. Yeah, that's fantastic. Annalisa, do you want to share anything more about that by unmuting and sharing with us?
So when we moved online, unfortunately, we had already been Zooming with lifelong learners and learning cities around the world. So we'd already got the Zoom thing down, which was very good when we had to go off campus halfway through. And so one of the classes said, I laid out all this list of many questions and subheadings like Matt was talking about, of options that they could do instead of being the learning partner of an adult learner throughout the semester. And they said, but we like applying what we're learning. Well, why can't we just do it with our moms or our dads or our little sisters or our aunties? And so that's what they did for the rest of the semester. It worked really well. So one woman worked with her mom on statistics. Another got his dad's jewelry business online and helped with marketing. And so it was a variety of stuff. One student's dad is a doctor in New York, and he would come out home stressed out, and he liked to cook, but he was a horrible cook. So she taught him how to cook.
Wow. That's cool.
Absolutely.
Matt, did you see that there was another, this was a great addition from Shilin saying about gaming and that connection that you make. Obviously, there's a learning piece to that as well, about incidental and how her connection, I'm really not reading it very eloquently, but Shilin, did you want to share anything about that with us? by unmuting your microphone.
Oh, I have been playing games for a long time, because of the COVID-19 stay-at-home order, so I have been playing. I checked. I think I have been playing games for more than 600 hours for the past few weeks, and I learned a lot from the game because while catching the fish, I could see. Like I could see the information of the fish because everything seems real in the game. And then 1 minute is the real minute in the real life. And then also in the game there, in the game we also donate things to the museum. So to fill the museum, and then it has different exhibitions, the box, the arts, the architecture, and then the fish, the animals, a lot of things, and then also the dinosaurs, like the fossils. So every time when I donate the item, the director of the museum will ask me if I want to learn something about this specific animal. So I learned a lot from the game, which I would never thought about learning.
That's
game.
cool.
So I think it's kind of an informal learning for adult learners.
How cool. Thank you, Shaylin. We have another, a great question that I think a lot of people are thinking about on their own. So thank you, Anne-Marie. And Anne-Marie specifically is saying, so how are adult ed teachers navigating their own skill sets to teach online? So for those of you who, and remember, there's like the whole balance. Some of us teach totally online. Some of us teach blended. Some of us teach face-to-face. So we're having to really catch up. I would love to hear from someone about that. Anything you want to share about how you're quickly getting on board? Why don't you raise your hand? Maybe if there's a...
I'll jump in here for a sec. I work for a completely online university, so the whole transition into everybody working from home was like not a huge deal for us because we all work from home all the time anyway. But one of the things that's been really fun is to help educators who aren't used to working online through that process and giving them support and helping them understand how to relate to the online learning. So I think for those of us that do have experience, one of the great opportunities out of all of this mess that we're in right now is being able to educate and help each other.
Trish, I don't think we can hear you.
Yeah, Trish, something happened to your microphone.
We can't hear you.
Is that better?
I think it might have switched to your computer from your headphone because we hear you very faintly.
Say that again. I'm on a webinar and I just saw the call and didn't want to ignore it. I'm not at home. You need to speak with my mom?
No, it's Trish.
Yeah, I'm not at home right now. Can you call back tomorrow?
I think, yeah, there we go. Trish, were you back or no?
Okay, so is there anybody else who wants to really, particularly if you are not, I think it would be interesting to know about those people who have had to, you know, that steep learning curve that you've had to go through if you don't teach online and now you have to teach online very, very quickly. Anyone want to share their experience with that? And while we're waiting, I'm going to do a little plug since Simone is on the call. For those of you who are engaging in that, there's a phenomenal online resource called eLearn. And they wonderfully accessible articles, quick tips. So that's one place to go. So nobody else wants to share? You can.
I can jump in, Christine, just offer my 2 cents worth, and that is I had done some research in the past on how instructors learn to teach online, and this was under normal circumstances where they were tasked with how to moving their classes online from face-to-face courses. And one of the things that was pretty consistent was that people found more help with their colleagues in their immediate subject area in moving online rather than from like general courses and professional development opportunities offered by larger organizations that were less specific to their discipline but more specific about technology. Because I think a lot of the problem is that a lot of professional development that focuses on helping people learn how to teach online mostly looks at the technology and doesn't look as much at the teaching part. And so for what it's worth, if you're looking at different options, the ones that involve, folks working with people who are doing the same things as you, like I said, your colleagues, they may be more helpful to you.
That's great. Oh, Steve, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So if we could take a little bounce internationally for a second. I know that, is it Fergal that has posted in our chat box about what's happening in Ireland? And I think some of us relate to that as well. If Fergal, would you like to share a little bit with us right now? What you put in the chat
Sure,
box?
it's a very simple comment, really, both in higher education and adult education centres. It was a very panicky, immediate move. Most teaching is done face-to-face in Ireland with a certain amount of blended learning. So there's a lot of panicky adaptation. I think the sort of trying to just say everything's normal, everything's fine, didn't really work, and people started having to adapt the techniques. I think more collaborative, more shorter types of discussions, more pointed discussions seems to work very well. But the key thing is what's missing, and a lot of students are saying this, I think particularly as Laura said, there's a vulnerable students, there has to be relational work going on. And I think that's the thing that we're all struggling with. And as we look into this in the medium term, how do you initiate new learning communities? How do you keep in contact with people? How do you speak to the sort of complex needs of adult learners in this type of provision? And most of my colleagues and feedback from students suggest that we're not getting it right yet, Oh,
Fergal, thank you for sharing that. I know that time's up or time is up. We're almost up in addressing how we've adapted, but there's some incredible points that people have made in the chat window, so please keep looking at that. I think if you don't mind, I'd like to finish this part of our discussion with just noting that every time I have spoken to colleagues, to teachers, to across the board, to other adult educators, we have, and particularly in adult basic ed and literacy, it has become striking that there is a huge difference between access and lack of access, and that there are some populations who are really in danger of their learning being interrupted in a very, very abrupt way. Anyway, I didn't say that very eloquently, but hopefully that will be part of the conversation that comes out of this pandemic from where I stand. So,
I just wanted to add something to what the last speaker said. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
sure,
is that
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes, it is.
Hey,
I thought
Lisa.
that was so awesome. He talked about, trying to make that transition and how we're not necessarily doing it so well. I thought particularly since we already had pre-existing relationships with these students in one-on-one environments, I'm really curious to see how much relational, collaborative, human interaction we can capture in these virtual environments going into the fall, and what we can do to facilitate that. I already knew my students in advance because we transitioned from face-to-face to online, which we already were doing blended learning, but for some of them, it was really a struggle to go in a total virtual environment. So I just wanted to comment about
that's
that.
a great
Coming in with people you don't even know now, before at least we knew them.
Yeah.
Great point. Matt, I'm going to mute and hand it over to you then, if that's okay.
You're right here next to me on my box, so it's like I'm looking at you, Christy. But thank you. And Lisa, that's a perfect question, and you don't even realize it, but it was a perfect segue because you were asking Steve the question, and Steve was going to be our next question answerer. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, yeah, I'm Steve Schmidt, and I'm the chair of the Commission for Professors of Adult Education. And first of all, I want to say that it's great to see so many of my colleagues from CPAE on here. It's nice to see so many faces and names. It's almost like being at a mini ACE conference virtually. So welcome to you, and welcome to all of my colleagues in ACE. It's great to see so many of you here today. So yeah, I'm was asked to talk about challenges associated with all the things we're going through now. And and I had a couple of thoughts that that have come to me over the past couple of months as I'm working with our adult learners. And the first is that this is this really brings to the surface, I think, for so many of us, the fact that in working with adult learners, they have so much going on. And I think that so much going on like that we don't even realize as adult educators. I have students who are EMTs, and so they're working extra hours. And I have students in different aspects of healthcare that are concerned about their own safety, and they're working with, maybe they may be living with elderly parents and are concerned about, spreading the virus. And so it really hits home the point that we're working with folks whose lives are so complex and multifaceted. And that's really, I think, something that we all know as adult educators, but to me, I'm really seeing the examples of just how complex and crazy and wild the lives of a lot of our adult learners are. So that is really something that I thought was important to note. And as Christy mentioned, I think the idea that so much of what we do and so much of what we teach and so much of the work we do with adult learners, so much comes back to Maslow's hierarchy. I always think that Maslow explains a lot, and we really saw this spring with the folks that we work with as adult educators. If they are concerned about their basic safety needs, their physiological needs that may all of a sudden become the focus of things because maybe they lost their job, or maybe they are not having the income in their households that they had before. So those basic needs really are sometimes overshadowing the somebody's ability to work on the self-actualization kind of needs, the higher level of Maslow's needs. So I think it's really important that we really consider our adult learners and consider the many different situations that they're in, and to practice good care for our learners, making sure our learners are okay and making sure that they're in good spots to learn, and doing what we can to make sure that we can facilitate the learning when they're ready to learn. Again, keeping in mind that there's so much going on with so many adult learners. So there's that piece of it, I think, is the fact that we need to make sure that we're showing good care for our learners, and that we're helping them to get to those spots where they can learn when they're ready to do so. And then I think the flip side of this is that as adult educators and members of CPAE, those of you who are in the Commission of Professors, there will be in the long run so many opportunities for adult education, because as the world changes and as we move to different stages of coping with the pandemic and working through this all, a lot of people are going to need education, adult education, maybe in preparation for new jobs or for new careers or for changes that they may be forced to make or that they are going to be making. And so I think we need to be ready for those learners when they're ready to learn, because at those points are going to be really critical, because they may be learning because they need a new job. And the sooner and the faster we can make that transition so they can learn and then get that new job, the better off we'll all be. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for us, and we need to be ready for those opportunities when they present themselves. But also keeping in mind, again, the importance of self-care, and the importance that our learners need to have the basics before they can move up to those higher levels. And so being aware of that in the situation we're in now, I think, is important.
Yeah, Steve, it's interesting you said that, and I looked back in the chat from Laura Formente. She said the poorer and more vulnerable people are at risk for lack of technology and competencies, but most of all for the lack of significant relationships, peer-to-peer, informal learning, etc. So as folks are typing into the chat, I thought that was a good callback.
Yeah, and that's true, Laura and Matt, that the whole issue of the digital divide, or the who has access to technology so they can continue to learn, and who doesn't have access. I mean, those are big issues that we haven't had to deal with on the scale that we're dealing with right now. We should have dealt with them before, but this is kind of pushing us into doing that. But yeah, there are a lot of issues of inequality for sure that are presenting themselves.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to hop in again here. Is my mic working now?
Yes.
Yep.
Are y'all hearing me? Okay, excellent. So I started to say earlier, I think Steve makes really great points about students having their needs met and being able to function in the environment. But I think we have to think about our fellow adult educators as well. You know, we have a lot of people who have been shoved into this online teaching literally, and their needs aren't being met. They're not used to technology. They don't like technology, and maybe they have home situations that are disrupted as well. So I think we have to focus on that self-care for the learners, but I think we also have to focus on that self-care for one another and supporting and helping one another through this process too, because it's not an easy transition for folks who aren't used to working from home.
Yeah, and Van kind of mentions that. Thank you, Trish. That's such an important point too. Is helping each other out and looking out for each other during this time. That's so critical. As Simone mentioned earlier, and Christy and I and she have our program is online, and we so our teaching teaching continued. We didn't have to make that change, and we didn't have to do it as quickly as so many others. But Van, as you note here, that one of the big challenges that many places are facing is the lack of technological proficiency for their instructors. And it's teaching is a difficult thing under the best of circumstances, but when you're teaching and trying to learn the technology at the same time, that can really be overwhelming. So thank you, Van, and thank you, Trish. Those are really good points.
So Steve, we have two folks who are ready to jump in. So we'll start off first with Van, and then we'll go to Aaron. Van, if you unmute yourself.
Yeah, hey, thanks. I appreciate it. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So one of the big things that we had, because our learners from the university I'm working at right now, which is Army Aviation. So we typically have a whole bunch of guys of our instructors and professors that teach, hands-on, face-to-face, small groups, those kinds of things. And their transition to online, we had to break their groups down into even smaller groups. To let the professors catch up quicker and then do some, it was mentioned earlier, peer-to-peer technology. Let me help you out with your curriculum and how to chunk it into smaller, manageable pieces. And then, as was mentioned earlier, the changing of assessments. We're so used to having them do an online, or not even an online, but an interactive questionnaire or proficiency test. We had to change over and make them do it by video, or let some of them do it by video. So you can demonstrate your proficiency with video and then upload that video. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Van.
Yeah, I think just to comment on that, I think that, Van, you made a great point about the creativity that's going on here in response to these situations that we find ourselves in, and the things that you and everybody's coming up with are not typical probably, but they do the job. And it's really interesting to see all the creative minds at work to find ways to teach and to assess and all that sort of thing during this time.
And then I know Aaron, you had a comment or a question as well. Aaron, if you unmute yourself.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, good. I heard I had problems with my audio on another meeting. First of all, thank you for this opportunity, because I just really appreciate it, and everybody putting the work into this. In terms of challenges, I always go to what do we not know that we don't know, and I think it's all good for us to look at what we do know, and working with the people that we've continued to be connected with. But this whole situation has put a huge spotlight on inequity in so many ways. And there are people that have found, I work at an adult school, and there are people who have found us simply because they wandered onto campus and said, what is this? Oh, I can learn English here. Do you know what I mean? Or you have a program that can help me. I don't have to go to college, but I can do a certificate program. They find this out by not word of mouth, but kind of like happenstance in the community. And without that physical opportunity for people to find these opportunities, I wonder how we can reach adult learners And the other thing is, how do we know who we've lost in the transition? So we have people that attend programs, different people's programs are structured in different ways, of course, but programs that aren't necessarily so organized where you know exactly who people are and where they are. And if they go away, do we know it's because perhaps it's the issue of basic needs, they have to take care of some other things? And there are people who, in the midst of being unable to meet basic needs, who are still motivated to work on their studies. And so I guess my big question is, how do we find out what we don't know at a time when we can't physically see each other? I'm not sure if my question is clear, but I think my point is that we only know who we're working with if they make the transition, and not everybody can make that transition to an online format. So I'm not exactly sure what my question is, but I think I've said enough. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Erin. Steve, did you have any thoughts on that, or are you formulating a thought? You're there you go.
Oh, okay. No, I'm just kind of reflecting on the question, because it's such a good question. I was hoping somebody smarter than me would answer me, because I'm not really sure. It is something we talk about, the fact that, you know, how we don't want to lose these learners, and you're right, Erin. It's a good point that, you know, maybe during these times people might turn to learning just as an outlet or a way to keep on going, you know, during trying times. And so yeah, I'm curious to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Yeah, I'll say, Erin, as you were speaking, a couple of things that came in on the chat that were very poignant was from Trish, that, you know, this is frightening, and we don't know what the consequences of this will be in the long term. And then Joelle, you know, also said that there's a lack of community that students are, for the program he's working in with Hispanic and Latinos, that they're homesick and they miss their classmates and family. So I think that's something we're probably all feeling. I don't have an answer either, so I'll stop and see if anyone wants to come off mute and add to that.
So I'll jump in here a little bit again, because I normally work with online students. And I think that's one of the biggest things in the online community is when people disappear, you don't know why they're disappearing, right? We don't have enough contact sometimes with our students to know. And I think my only solution, Erin, for what you're talking about is an intentional plan for outreach and contacts. We know from research that in the virtual world, we have to be so much more intentional about creating relationships and making the connections. And we can't just do it once. We have to stay at it, and we have to do it over and over and over again. So in terms of not knowing what you don't know about your students, my recommendation would be some kind of targeted outreach. You know, everybody takes 20 students and you check in with them weekly, or however many students you can. And especially the ones you're not hearing from, working harder to reach out. And then I think too, you have to vary the type of outreach. Not everyone responds to email. And especially if students are already overwhelmed with the online environment and they're like, you know, up to here with having to read emails and discussion boards and posts and all of that, maybe a better way to reach them is by phone and having a conversation, or by a video chat rather than just text-based communication. It's super easy in the online environment to just be like, oh, I'm firing it off an email and then I'll see what happens. But emails are not a good way to build relationships. So for students who are not responding to that, I think we have to step out of that. And I think the big idea is for them to know that you care. They may not respond. Maybe if they have so much going on, to Steve's point, if their basic needs aren't being met, they don't really care about answering an email from an instructor at college because they're trying to figure out how to take care of a sick loved one or get food on their table or something. But if you're reaching out and pushing out that thought that we care about you and we want to know that you're okay, eventually that will bring them back, even if they can't do it right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Trish. And there was a great idea, Trish, from Lisa. And Amy also posted in the chat a resource. So, you know, if you've got any additional resources, not Amy, but everyone, but also Amy, if you've got any additional resources you'd like to post in the chat, feel free to do that.
Matt?
Yes.
Hi, it's Kayon. May I add to
Hey.
what Trish just said? She said it so eloquently.
Yeah.
But I did want to add that I noticed something that my chair did that I really admired from the School of Education at the University of Rhode Island. She, along with the calls and the texts and the different modalities, she formed a task force that would allow us to now begin to troubleshoot some of those concerns, so that in the future, when we're talking to people with the different concerns, we now have a solution, right? A proposed solution, some way in which we're going to make amendments to a program or to a strategy or to some kind of requirement that adult students or students in general would have. And so alongside all of that communication, we can use that, if possible, as a database to begin to then formulate solutions for those concerns.
Very good. Well, I just want to be conscious of time. We're at the next and final question, and I see Jackie. There you go. You've unmuted yourself. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Trish, for the additional feedback, and everyone else, Kayon, and all those who added to that. So I will turn over to Jackie now for our last question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jacqueline McGinty, and I am the current chair of the Commission for Community, Minority, and Nonformal Education. And I think on this third question we were looking at is, we talked about adaptations and challenges, and now kind of looking at, what innovations will we take into, past this time? We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but how will we implement, and what are the things that we did find useful that we can use these innovations going forward? And from my perspective, what I have been working on in regards to community education in the past year, about a year ago, I started a project working with older adults on developing a program for teaching technology skills to older adults living in independent and assisted living facilities. So this was a very timely project that we started. We didn't even, we knew that there was an issue. We've talked a lot today about access, about the digital divide, and our older adult population is often more marginalized when it comes to using technology. And one thing we found with COVID-19 is that much of the isolation and loneliness that older adults are already experiencing is even worse now because of that lack of community education. Community education is huge in many areas, especially with older adult learners, exercise programs, all types of education, nutrition education, and then now we're doing technology education. And we actually created a program where we were giving older adults tablets and teaching them how to use tablets and how to use Zoom, actually, video conferencing. So we had finished the program, the pandemic hit, and so we were happy thinking, wow, our 16 students that we trained can now communicate with the rest of the world in isolation. But that got us thinking about how are we going to innovate this program to now deliver it on a broader scale across where I live in Pennsylvania. So we're working with Pennsylvania Department of Aging to see how we can actually scale this program across Pennsylvania to actually deliver instruction for older adults or anyone actually who wants to learn technology right now at a distance without actually ever being there. So that's our innovation that we're currently working on, is how do we train trainers, so train the trainer model, very familiar to adult education, from a distance, and how do we train people who are actually not even in the room with us on technology. So those are the challenges, adaptations, and innovations, all from our community standpoint. And I'd be really interested to hear what other community educators are finding at this time. Sorry, that was a long-winded introduction.
That's perfect.
Matt, can I just mention something interesting that popped up as people are getting ready to address what Jacqueline had asked about. Interesting, here we are talking about access and our introvert and how our connection with each other. So just got an email from one of our phone-in callers, right? One of our participants here. Think about it right now, the people who are phoning in don't have access to the chat window, right? So, and even it's harder for them to engage with us. So it's just kind of a night, kind of a moment to stop and think. One of the lessons coming out of this is the assumptions we make about what is accessible, and then the assumptions we make about how people can interact. It kind of piggybacks on what we just talked about.
That's actually really glad that you mentioned that, Chrissy, because we've been talking about that, and we did a pilot study on this training we developed for the older adults, and we were there with them. And one thing we realized, and I think someone else mentioned that in the last question, is what don't we know? And we made so many assumptions. I'm not a digital native at all, but many of my graduate students are. And when we developed the training, we took for granted so many things, terminology, language, the way we refer to technology, that we didn't even realize the different levels even across our population that we were training. So we're learning a ton about what that means. So I'm glad that you included that too.
I would like to add a little bit about community education and during the COVID. A lot of times, especially in our organization, we're talking about adult education. I have been just training actually parents, which are the adults, to teach their children at home. And I think one of the problems that we have is that non-formal education has been sidelined, and it has been pushed to the forefront now. If non-formal education may have been accepted or seen as a form of education, I think parents and some of our adult students wouldn't be such in a panic to say, I don't know how to teach my children. This is what we're experiencing now from the communities at large. And so they've been thrust out of the institution into a non-formal or informal environment and a community environment. So they need to they're having problems finding out ways to use their community, their environments, their non-institutional surroundings to actually inform or teach their children. So what I've been doing just personally, because I'm a homeschooler before this, I guess they say a wanting homeschooler. I wasn't a forced homeschooler. That's the terminology they're using now, is for adult homeschoolers now is forced homeschoolers. Many people turn to me for just a clue of what to do. A lot of parents became adult educators themselves, like teaching their teenagers, teaching their college students, and they were at a loss as to what to actually do. So I just think that non-formal education is at the forefront right now, and the lines of setting it up, maybe not formally, but just, hey, you can go outside, there's a pond across the street, or even if you're in an apartment building, teaching children to find the fire escapes, teaching adults where the fire escapes are. Many of us did not know about our neighbors, didn't know our community from before this COVID or the pandemic. So we've just been trying to set up lines of community communication, because even with some of the COVID response, because those lines of community communication were not in place for education, community education, people didn't know where to get masks, that masks were even needed, certain medications, or where to get food, or anything like that. So I think just the situation for our commission is it puts it to the forefront how important non-formal education, informal education, and community education is, because like many of you on other commissions have said, is that your students are like, I'm not concerned about GED right now. My children are out of school. I don't know how to teach them. I need to find a way, transportation to get these packets, or how do I log on? How do I teach my children versus even myself? So I think community should be expanded, even though we are an adult education organization, but it intermingles with your teenagers, with your children. Community education transcends age and generation. So I think that's something we can all focus on, because we know that our adult learners a lot of times have lives and have family members that are not necessarily adults or even in education, but the non-formal and informal ways of learning can actually be transmitted through some of the more formal ways. So, and that's just my 2 cents I'm adding from the Community Commission.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you. Yeah, and Stacy, as you were saying that, there were some points coming in as well, so into the chat. So I certainly don't want to go back and read through all those. It looks like Steve has responded back to him. I think I saw Annalise as well. So some good stuff going on in there. I'm going to circle back, Jacqueline, to you to see if you have any other final thoughts, points.
Yeah, and one thing I think I'm realizing, and that's coming out a lot of this, is the role of community and community education and the role that we all play in communities. It's really made me realize that the missing out. I have a high school senior graduating this year, you know, and as Stacy mentioned, where many of us are becoming adult educators at home in different capacities. And one thing I was talking to my students about is that we didn't have graduation this year, and the role that these activities, these community activities play in our lives, whether they're part of formal education or non-formal education, is that we really need to think and rethink about the value that this provides for our communities in so many different ways. Food for people and connections, and how to find resources that our education institutions, whether they formal or non-formal, provide for us. Is that now in this new situation, we really need to think about how do we reinvent those communities in a digital world, and how do we reach that digital world to the people who are being marginalized from it. And that's a very big issue that I think every single one of us really needs to be thinking about how we can do our part
there. Absolutely. Did anyone else want to add to that? We still have a little bit of time before our wrap up. Any other thoughts?
I just have a question. This is Jelena Austin. Has anyone engaged your institution's office of like external affairs, or has anyone explored some opportunities to engage a lobbyist or really talk to someone about some legislation or policy reform with specific regard to adult learners?
I've heard a little bit in regards to technology access. I know we were talking about it in Pennsylvania, not specifically for adult learners, but about looking at providing more access as a public service in our state.
So can I just throw something out? I thought Deborah Kennedy was on the call, and she may have had to leave us early. She's the president of the National Coalition for Literacy. If, and I'll try to get it in the chat box to you, but if you are interested in those kinds of questions, Jelena, they have some incredible resources in terms of advocacy. So, you know, next step and projects that are underway. So I don't multitask. I'm like Matt. I don't multitask well, but I'll try and get it in there for all of us at some point. It's a great site anyway, and it will help all of us maybe spread the word about the census as well. Had to throw in that plug before we left.
Yeah. Thank you, Jelena. Anyone else have any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, hey Matt, it's Mary here.
Hey Mary.
Yeah, again, the way of thinking, reflecting, the pandemic happened, it's not temporary. It has changed our lives forever. So with that, how do we envision adult education in the future? We look at adult education, or education as a matter of fact, something that happens primarily within brick and mortar. So moving forward, how do we change? What changes do you see in? We've seen changes in delivery. What about our theory, our literature, the issues that matter to us that need further investigation? It opens up a wide array of areas for us to research, for us to practice, that we really need to pay attention to that, because today is the pandemic, tomorrow it might be a hurricane, it might be another 9/11 or 2025 or something, another crisis that interrupts our teaching and learning, that we need to create a more nimble profession that we can respond to that quite readily when that time comes. So there's not an interruption in what we do and how we do it. Just some thoughts here.
Oh, a great question. If you'd like to come off mute and respond, anyone?
This is Marcy speaking. I think Terry unmuted me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful, because I've been sending, to Christy and Terry, I've been sending, responses, contributions, but I couldn't get through.
Oh.
And so there's a couple of things I want to say. First of all, I want to thank you for the experiential learning, what it feels like to have things you want to say, but no one's hearing you.
Right.
So that's good. I'll treasure that in some ways, because I have said some things that may or may not be helpful at this point, but they're there with Christy and Terry anyway. I just want to respond to Mary because I think it's a really good point. I think one of the biggest things as educators of adults as well as adult learners, all of us trying to further development, go on a developmental trajectories and continue that, is one of the biggest things fundamentally is learning to live with uncertainty. And that's somehow, there's a lot of research that needs to be done on that, but there's a lot of trekking in terms of how do people do this and how do we help people with this. And I think some of the biggest teachers in some ways are those people that live with adversity, people that never know what's going to hit them, that don't live in comfort zones. So I just want to contribute that as food for thought. And thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Marcy, and for I appreciate you coming off of mute and you also dialed in as well. We appreciate that, and thank you also as well for the point. Any other points?
Yes, I wanted to add. I just dropped a link in the chat. This is a free resource at Harvard Business Publishing, and it's free for any academics who have university email address. But there's a tremendous amount of online support and webinar adjustment materials for adult education specifically. And so I would encourage people to use that as a resource. But today we had a webinar that I thought was really interesting, and the speaker talked about our approach to introducing this new normal to students. And his recommendation is to have teams of short-term planning and long-term planning. And that in order to not suffer significant enrollment losses, that we approach the fall for our students as this is the contingency plan for the fall, but have our faculty plan for the year. And so I think that's something we need to be aware of, because COVID is going to cause some enrollment hits. And somebody might decide, hey, I'll let this be my year of just finding myself before I enroll. And so in an effort to kind of salvage what we do, maybe we should think about both of those kind of approaches as we move forward in higher education.
Absolutely, thank you.
Hi, this is Michael. One of the issues that was highlighted from Christy was, people on the phone were not able to join the chat. But I think I saw an article recently, I think in the Chronicle for Higher Education, about adults or students in general with accessibility needs. And the article was geared towards, has accessibility gone out the window? And so that's a crowd that we're not even, our literature needs to address more, especially in this time of COVID. How do we address their needs so that everybody has equal access, especially those with accommodations in our, universities and colleges and community colleges. So those with accessibility needs, regardless of what their needs are, we need to make sure that learning happens and no one's disregarded.
Thank you, Michael. I see Annalisa raising her hand as well. So thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Annalisa?
I think I'm following up on what Michael is saying. I learned recently about South Bend, Indiana's new system called Bendable that's for lifelong learning, and it's a combination of bricks and mortar and online stuff. And what they're doing right now during the pandemic is they have outfitted some school buses to be mobile hotspots, and they're going to the areas not only with mobile hotspots but with lunch. So you can go within the vicinity, you can go pick up your lunch and you can access the internet at the school bus or in the vicinity of the school bus.
Mm-hmm.
This is Jelena. I'm gonna jump in there. So thank you, Mary, for bringing that up, because that's something that I've thought about over the past few weeks and months. I see this hopefully as an opportunity for us in our field to problematize some of our theories. I have felt for a long time that some of the theories and concepts that we, have we lean on in our field come from a very privileged perspective. Andragogy in particular, I rarely use, andragogy in my research, in my work, because I feel like sometimes it doesn't speak to me and all of the parts of my lifelong learning, or speak to me as an adult learner. So I hope that this allows us in our field to engage in our scholarly explorations in a different way. I hope that it kind of ignites and serves as a catalyst for us to think of new innovations when it comes to data collection, data analysis techniques. I hope to see an increased collaboration amongst our colleagues in our field, because we do have the opportunity now with the virtual technology to engage in a different way as scholars and researchers. And there's some really good opportunities out there when it comes to funding that otherwise in the past have not always been available to us. I think that right now, the silver lining in this is that we are attractive as adult educators. But the caution with that is also that we have to make sure that we protect who we are. We protect what we know adult education is, because there are a lot of people who, are trying to exploit it or communicate it or speak to it as if they are experts, and they're kind of offbeat a little bit. And if we're not careful, then that's going to be the narrative and what people think this thing called adult education is about, or this is what the adult learner looks like. So I hope that is something that is an outgrowth of this, and that's something that can help to allow us to foster different type of sustainability and or advancement within our field. And the last thing, and this is just because, I'm the IRB chair now at our institution, please protect your adult learners so that they're not exploited. There are a lot of people who want to do a lot of research right now, and, engage and ask questions. Protect your students, your adult learners, that population. And while they're not considered a vulnerable population according to the federal government, we know that they are vulnerable right now. And so I encourage everyone to just keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I see that we've just, yeah, I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, jumping on what, kind of summarizing and jumping on to what Jelena and Mary said, when we consider all these issues, please, all of you out there, keep in mind this question: what can we at ACE do for you? And how can we all help you? And how can we all work together to help make sure that all of us work through this? And how can we share ideas rather than having to reinvent the wheel? And so when you think about these issues that we're talking about today, remember that you're not alone. You're part of a big group here, and and there are a lot of people with a lot of great ideas here. So going forward, what can we at ACE do? What can we do to make this transition, and what can we do to make working in this new world easier or more efficient for you? Because this is your organization, and we depend on you for ideas, and we depend on you for support and suggestions for a way forward. So please, as you think about all these issues, think about what can we do at ACE here for you, and what can we do for each other.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. I was going to wrap up with similar, but you said it better than I could have. So I just want to thank everyone who joined today. I think at one point we had, I don't know where we're at now, we're at, I think 54. We got up to close to 60, which completely blew away my expectation. I truly thought it would just be my fellow commission chairs and I on the call. So this was wonderful, fantastic conversation. I would love to continue the conversation as well. Thank you all for coming, and looking forward to potentially doing this again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And Matt, I think you're going to be doing a podcast too to come.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Terry. Yeah. Yes, there will be a podcast that will follow up on this one. So look forward to doing that very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.